So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Was in Gravity Falls Universe. So let's start the series. Mason, Dipper, Pines was a very intelligent boy. His sister would commonly tease him over his nerdiness, before he would mention the nerd that made one of her favorite things, such as Irvin H. DeJong inventing sprinkles or Henry Rushman inventing glitter, two people she now knows a bit about and defends, Irvin for being a baking master to invent her favorite topping, or Henry being manly because he was a rancher and mechanic, two very manly professions. The only thing that kept the two from truly being at each other's throats was because the teasing was all in good fun. Dipper had never mentioned how he got so knowledgeable about so many things, however. Their parents never really see him doing research on anything. Dipper is usually found with a handheld game, using the most efficient method to complete it. There are also times that Mabel has friends over and they pester him to show them some magic, which is either one of those magic tricks you can see on TV, which he then tries to explain and help them learn, or an act of science, like when he taught them how to make rock candy, which allowed Mabel to add a new ingredient to her Mabel juice. Now some may be wondering how Dipper got so smart. Well, this isn't his first time through life, or even his third. Dipper has actually lost count over how many times he has gone through his life. You see, the first time Dipper hit the age of 70 he felt like he was forgetting things. No thanks to a certain sister that teased him over little things. Mabel actually had the memory issue worse, considering she would forget that she had just teased him and tease him again, or forgot why she teased him. So Dipper had a plan. He would use his science knowledge, along with his mythological and weirdness knowledge, combine them, and make a machine to cure his and Mabel's issues. Well, ever since he activated his machine, he had been able to remember everything perfectly. Too bad the machine had a backlash and electrocuted him to death. Since then, he has died in a multitude of ways. His second death was even in an insane asylum, though he was the first to convince every inmate there to do the Addams Family theme at some point, and managed to be remembered for it. Dipper spent that lifetime just keeping himself in there to help the other patients out from within, and actually managed to help more patients than the doctors that worked there, until a female patient grew too attached to him and realized that he was sane and only stayed to help everyone. In her defense, she did try to have a relationship with him properly, until she started to feel like he was trying to help her, which caused her to feel like he was trying to get rid of her, which caused her to snap and desire to be with him in the afterlife. That was when he learned it was not a one-time thing. Several doctors that received anonymous letters about how to help their patients were so confused the next run-through. With this knowledge, Mason has gone through several lifetimes to accomplish all sorts of dreams. He became a hero and went Batman on everyone, even managing to keep it from his parents, though Mabel eventually became his Robin. He would say Batgirl, but after explaining the issues with the sexual tension between the two characters, Mabel agreed to be Robin. She did not like the thought of people thinking about that stuff happening between her and her brother. He later did a 180 and went full Dr. Evil on the world in his third attempt. It was rather surprising how often people were willing to drop a bomb on you when you threatened the globe. Lesson learned. Side note, Dipper can remotely deactivate bombs within mere seconds, and can build tractor beams. Dipper has lived through so many career options at this point. His resume overtook Mario's with how long it was. And for a while now, Dipper has been bored, so he chose to just go along with Mabel's flow once again, which leads us to now, as they exit the bus to a sleepy little town known as Gravity Falls. Dipper has come back here countless times, some to learn from either, or both his grunkles. He remembers when he convinced Ford to take Mabel as an apprentice instead of himself, or when he got his grunkles to take them on their boat adventures, or when he took over the town, and either lead it to be a perfect utopia, or burn it to the ground as a tyrannical overlord. Yes, he got that bored. Dipper has gone through so many lifetimes now. He has dated, tortured, and saved every single person here. Dipper has grown so bored at some point that he has experienced absolutely every method to die. Surprisingly, the person to kill him the least has been Pacifica. Apparently, her parents are so messed up from the get-go in his universe that the only way for him to get her to kill him was if he threw her away like a broken toy. She would become so heartbroken. She would go murder-suicide on him. She actually wound up being his favorite person in the end. She has fallen in love with him so many times and in so many ways. He actually referred to her as his soulmate before. But back to his current run-through of his life. Dipper had kept his head down this time around, mostly doing anonymous work over the internet to make a huge profit. He has made a name for himself online, creating inventions for people for a large sum of cash. It started as a challenge for everyone to try and prove his claims of being able to build anything wrong. He has yet to fail. He has made some of the most sci-fi ideas real since he was 10 years old, and has sold them online to turn a profit. He has even sold some inventions to Northwest, who most likely only bought them so they could attempt to sue him when he didn't deliver the device. They have obviously failed every time they tried. And now, Dipper has decided to literally know everything. He remembers this time around when he tore love apart when some popular girl decided to bully Mabel. She dumped milk on his sister's head, so he revealed truths about her that her boyfriend didn't know, and even mentioned things about her boyfriend she didn't know. He still asks why kids their age was even dating, but it was one of those things they saw adults doing, so they did it to prove they were mature. Parents thought it was cute, but when they boy was too dumb to know you can only date one girl at a time, it got less cute, especially when parents found it awkward to explain why you only date one person at a time to their 6-year-old children, or why siblings don't date, or why daddy was allowed to date multiple girls. Yeah, that one escalated way past the intended consequences, though Dipper never admitted that it was an accident that the cheating was exposed. How was he supposed to learn about that stuff when he was barely allowed outside due to his physical age? No one ever picked on them again after that, at least. Everyone just started calling him a psychic. He actually can't recall ever being a psychic billionaire inventor before, so it was new at least. Alright, enough getting sidetracked, maybe. Dipper sighed over his own wandering thoughts, as he walked over and took the signs from a surprised Stan, who didn't even get out what they were for. I will go hang them in the creepy part of the woods. Stan opened and closed his mouth several times before just staring at Mabel. Dipper knows everything. He has never said how, or why. But he is never wrong, no matter who tries what. I have never been able to catch him being wrong. Wendy chuckled as Seuss walked over and asked several questions about things he wanted to know about, only to be reminded that Dipper knew everything, not her. Dipper sighed as he completed the task quickly, before stepping over and opening a familiar metal tree, and retrieving a familiar journal, and walking back to the shack as he started to go over the info in the book and correct several errors Ford had made when he wrote down his research. That guy really needs to get off his high horse. As Dipper returned, he caught Mabel coming out of the shack. Dipper smiled as he greeted her. "Hey Mabel, can't wait to meet your boyfriend." Mabel pouted as she crossed her arms and huffed. "You weren't even here. How could you know I found a boyfriend so quickly?" "Psychic powers?" Mabel rolled her eyes at him. Having gotten tired of his responses, he would on occasion switch it up. "Psychic powers, simple deduction, deciphering the universal algorithm, and you just told me," were all answers he has given before, and he never used the last one in context that made sense. It was literally just a game to him. Dipper walked in and sat in the lazy man in the living room. Stan walked and asked about the book, looking a bit nervous as he got a good look at the front. "What cha reading there, Slick?" "Your brother's third journal. And yes, you can see it, after I am done fixing the calculations he had on the portal." Stan stood there in shock as his mug slid from his grip, spilling his coffee. Well, he believed Mabel now. Mabel pulled the boy into the room as she looked super excited to introduce him to at least her grunkle Stan, but froze when Dipper spoke up. "Have you done what I told you to do before dating any boy at all?" Mabel groaned. "But it's such a silly rule you made. It also makes any boy I get a date with look at me like I'm an idiot." Dipper cleared his throat, as Mabel pouted at him before reaching into her pocket and pulling out a whistle. The moment Mabel blew into the whistle, Norman fell apart into 5 short gnomes and began to beg her to stop. Mabel dropped the whistle from her mouth as she stared at the small group of gnomes. "I told you that would save you in the future." Dipper just sat in the chair as he smirked at her. Stan started to chuckle at the gnomes, comparing them to a certain evil ankle-biter he hates. Mabel groaned as she picked the whistle back up and glared at her brother. "Well, you can't really blame the guy for needing to hide the fact that he is a gnome. What girl wouldn't be cautious of a mythical creature approaching her? Though I can't defend him lying about his name. That is just silly." Dipper rolled his eyes, letting Jeff, who stood up to stand at the front of his little group, speak up. "So, you wouldn't mind being our gnome queen and marrying all 1,000 of us?" "Of course I don't want that. Not only am I just 12 with my whole life ahead of me, but I am not looking for a harem." Mabel blew into the whistle a bit more as she kicked the gnomes out of the shack. Stan blinked as he picked up the mug he dropped. "Well, that happened," Stan walked off as he shouted to Seuss about cleaning up the drink he spilled. Equals dash 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 equals episode 2 equals dash 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 equals. Dipper sat at the kitchen table with several magazines sitting about said table, trying his best to find something, anything, he has not read before. He has gone through several lifetimes reading the same things over and over again. And yes, he has gone insane and went on a rampage already. It took 5 tries for him to cause the apocalypse Rambo style. Having made the guns he used himself, he at one point was inspired by a show called Rick and Morty when Morty went crazy with a death crystal. So he actually did that ending twice. Mabel caught sight of an ad in the paper and grew excited. Human-sized hamster ball? I am human-sized, Dipper bro, can I borrow a bit of cash? Stan, having heard her, looked a bit confused. Why would you ask him for cash? Dipper looked at his uncle for all of 2 seconds before he responded. I am an independent inventor with an anonymous website where I sell said inventions to everyone worldwide. I am literally a billionaire. Stan stared in shock at his nephew, Mabel still poking Dipper and saying please several times. Dipper sighed as he took the magazine and clipped the order slip so he could send it in. Mabel was thanking him repeatedly as she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his temple with each saying of thanks. Stan shook his head to clear the shock. Well, Mr. Rich Kid, are you too good to spend a day with your grunkle? For family fun day. Dipper was actually caught off guard. I have been so bored lately. I completely missed what the day was. Sure, Grunkle Stan. Let's go fishing. Stan groaned. Can you at least let me surprise Mabel with what we plan to do? Mabel groaned as Dipper smirked at Stan. If you would leave the joke book here, then maybe. However, we both know that you wouldn't leave the thing behind. Stan shrugged and smirked as he put Dipper in a gentle chokehold and gave him a noogie. They made some good time on the way to the lake, Stan not needing to blindfold them after Dipper revealed he knew already, though Mabel still wore it for fun. Dipper and Stan pulled Mabel along to the beach as Stan pulled the blindfold off her. She acted surprised rather well, which actually made Stan feel a bit more appreciated. As Stan and Dipper were setting up the boat to take out, Mabel got distracted by Old Man McGucket and his story about being attacked by a sea monster called the Gobblewonker. Everyone laughed at the old man when the police made a crack at him. Dipper just sighed as he walked over and patted the man on the back. It's okay, they are just upset they have never seen the beast before. Officer Blubbs was the one who called the boy out. Oh yeah, city boy? And what makes you so confident in McGucket's story? Dipper rolled his eyes as he pulled out a device that he tossed into the water, pulling out a screen with controls on the side. Several people actually stepped up behind the boy and looked over his shoulders, and all took a step back as they saw the Gobblewonker sitting at the bottom of the lake. See, proof he isn't as insane as you all claim. Congrats on being proven right, McGucket. As Dipper walked to the end of the pier, he reached out his left hand as the water drone jumped out into his hand. Dipper proceeded to jump into Stan's boat as he pocketed the drone. Well, we going to fish or what? Stan just shrugged as he helped Mabel into the boat, leaving behind the shocked and confused crowd of citizens, who were now questioning if Old Man McGucket was right about the Gobblewonker. What else was he right about? Stan got to enjoy an entire day of fishing with his niece and nephew. They wound up taking the Stan O' back to the docks when Seuss offered to let them join him in his larger boat, which Stan agreed to so they would have more room. As the day came to an end, Dipper found Fiddle Ford and Tate waiting to thank him when he was on his way out, either having expected someone to prove the old man right, let alone stand up for him. And so, they returned to the shack, Dipper pulling out a small flip book he has been using to mark off the issues he has been encountering every time he came to Gravity Falls. The gnomes and the Gobblewonker were the two he scribbled out. Dipper and Mabel were lazing about the living room, Dipper ignoring what Mabel was watching as he looked over Journal 1 to fix the issues in it, having explained to Stan that he was doing already. Stan just enjoyed that Ford was being corrected instead of the other way around. Seuss came in and asked them to guess what he found, and while Mabel shouted buried treasure, Dipper answered differently. You found a secret room filled with wax statues that are cursed to come alive when the moon is waxing. Mabel and Seuss both stared at Dipper in confusion and a bit of fear. Seuss grabbed a baseball bat as he led them to the room, having learned to trust Dipper when he said something was up. As they made it to the room, revealing Dipper to be right about the wax statues, Dipper pulled Stan away after he scared Mabel and Seuss and explained the situation to him. equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals a couple days after equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals. Stan had finished a brand new attraction and had even used his brilliant advertising skills to draw in a crowd to see the opening. Everyone was welcomed with the sight of a new building off to the left of the shack, somewhat near the woods. It was long and slightly narrow, a single floor but still tall enough that even their tallest person could enter comfortably. He introduced the twins as the main creators, giving credit where due. Several people complained about the lack of free pizza that was promised, only for Stan to laugh as he pointed towards a small cottage. If you can make it through the Hall of Haunts, you will have earned your prize. There was a shout about him being too cheap, only for Stan to grab a plate of pizza from his nephew that did indeed have a slice of pizza. Well, if you really don't want to get any more for us. Several people just rolled their eyes as they each started to enter the small building. As several entered, they were caught off guard as lights turned on, though what caused a couple to turn and run were the fact that each light revealed a head. It caught everyone off guard, but those that stayed scoffed over what they noticed to be just busts of famous people throughout history, and even some from fiction, until each head opened their eyes wide and started shouting and threatening everyone to free them from the cages they were in, even going so far as to slam their heads into the glass. Needless to say, the rest ran off. Wendy looked into the building and shivered when they shouted at her about freeing them. How? Wendy's simple question to Dipper was actually answered honestly. Stan stole some cursed wax figures. They enjoyed a time where they could wander about and troll him. Then Stan locked them away and they would have tried to murder him if we left them alone. So we chopped them off at the shoulders while they couldn't defend themselves and let Mabel craft more busts of whatever fictional or historic figures she felt like. I then created a type of light that simulated the energy of the waxing moon. So now they're cursed to forever scream, shout, and threaten any who enter. Wendy just stared at the boy, carefully stepping away from the small cabin. So, any advice for me? Dipper chuckled. Give each of your exes a call and make sure they know you broke up with them. Wendy glared at him a bit. Before doing exactly that, Dipper went over to get some more pizza with the rest of the Mystery Shack crew, or MySC for short according to Mabel when she heard him refer to them as that once. Equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals episode 4 equals dash equals dash equals dash equals dash equals. Dipper continued to listen to his sister talk about all the wax busts she made, all the while he mixed up some potions for a new attraction he made up himself to cure his boredom. Mabel was helping him out somewhat, decorating the ballot cards he had printed out for people to buy. The way he explained his attraction was rather simple. He would brew up some potions and everyone would buy a card to vote on which one he drank. He had them numbered 1 through 4 so he could use the same cards no matter what potions he made. He would make 4 potions that would alter his form into different beastman forms. People would look at which potion did what, buy a card and write which one they wanted him to drink on it before dropping it in a box. Friday, he would tally them up and drink the winning potion and stay that form for the weekend before drinking a potion to turn him back. Mabel had even wanted to join in on the fun, so he did alter them slightly for paired potions. One weekend, they could be a couple kitten kids, the next they could gender swap. It was all up to the voters. Explanation in author notes. Dipper and Mabel were interrupted as Seuss pointed out a commercial that was playing on the television. A recognizable and annoying commercial by a little child psychic that Dipper knew all too well. This started up Mabel comparing the two and talking about them able to be friends and swap psychic secrets between each other. Dipper sighed as the events that would drag him to dealing with the stupid brat unfolded. Worst was he couldn't convince Mabel that the boy was a fraud because he already showed how magical the world could be to her, using both real magic and science to prove that anything is possible. And so came the night for them to see the act. Gideon was the same every other time he has seen this crap, and so he was not surprised when everyone stood up when he used his amulet to encourage them to do so. Everyone but himself, that is, would have been Mabel as well, but she just stood up to keep the mood up. Dipper had already given her a necklace to prevent the amulet from affecting her. She just wanted to stand up with everyone else just to play along and be included. And then came when he guessed her name. This time, Dipper lampshaded that he was gonna use her name sweater to add to his show. She was hoping that he would have done something different to prove her brother wrong. And even though she was having fun, she knew full well that the boy was a fraud now. Her sweater was one of those traps to pull them out. If they went for the obvious of guessing her name, they probably couldn't tell her anything else about her. And since this was a simple show rather than an attraction like her grunkle's shack, or her brother who could literally tell you your full story before telling you exactly how horrible or pathetic you were, to the point that one time he did it, he caused someone to become slightly depressed. The person was fine now, having gone to a bit of therapy. Dipper could be rather scary when you angered him. As Dipper and Mabel were leaving, Mabel expressed her enjoyment over the little song, and picked on Dipper for being a wet blanket over a harmless show. Over the next few days, Dipper watched as Mabel started her dates with Gideon and Stan started his tirade when he found out about it. Then came the night where Mabel came home depressed, before Stan sent her to her room crying when he mentioned her marrying Gideon. Dipper frowned at his grunkle, before pulling out $100 bill and ripped it into confetti right in front of him. And so, while Stan cried over good money being ruined in the living room, Dipper went to see his sister. "I am gonna have a talk with Gideon, no exceptions." Mabel popped her head out of her sweater as she stared at Dipper. Dipper always said that, before everything changed for the better for her, people stopped bullying her, apologized for hurting or inconveniencing her. It was also what he said before each time the kids had mental breakdowns or similar things. Just please don't hurt him. Dipper smiled. "Your happiness is what matters in the end, dear sister. I will only make sure he corrects this terrible behavior." Mabel managed a happy smile as she watched her brother walk towards her date, which she realized she never told him where it was. Of course her brother knew already. Dipper walked into the restaurant and straight over to Gideon's table before sitting down across from the boy. "Excuse me, Dipper, was it? What do I owe the pleasure of seeing you this evening? I was expecting your sister, and must sadly say that you hold no appeal for me." Dipper just smiled calmly. "Well, you have obviously been mistaken, for if you desire to date my sister, you must be approved by her closest family member. It is only proper." Gideon, while annoyed at having his date hijacked, smiled as he rubbed his BOLO tie. "Well, I hope I can impress you then." Gideon didn't show it, but he did notice the lack of reaction that he expected from Dipper. "Well, let's start with talking about our week, shall we?" Gideon smiled confidently, about to start talking about what all he did for Mabel and how much she enjoyed it, until Dipper continued. "I will go first. It started off with my sister making a new friend, which was great. She was so happy to find someone who liked sparkly things and just being girly with her." Gideon smiled, knowing the new friend was him, but he did pout over being called girly. As she returned from their second playdate, however, she was less ecstatic, showing signs of nervousness, and then she returned from the actual date. She showed distress and a little fear. Here, Dipper paused as he made an order to the waiter, who claimed Gideon's usual was being prepared. He also mentioned how it was rude and unprofessional to prepare one guest's dinner before receiving an order from the full table. He also mentioned that this restaurant would feel the heat if Gideon was given any more special treatment. While the waiter was about to argue with the boy, Dipper held up a golden ticket, a gold ticket that signified he was important enough to receive an invite to the Northwest Fest held a bit later in the summer. Well, Dipper just got shot up in importance. He could complain and give a bad review to other important people from the party, or the opposite. Gideon had a sudden realization that he was losing power over people in there. Gideon was about to rub his BOLO tie once again, when Dipper picked up the fancy glass of fizzy juice and smiled. He then spoke in an echo-ish and garbled language. Mount Nivaradalide Cybrev Psi. Gideon couldn't understand what he said, but he felt the effects. His amulet dimmed and died within moments of Dipper starting that sentence. Mabel's most recent return, however, she broke down crying about how she was being pressured into saying yes. She was becoming depressed. Gideon stared in shock. "I have done nothing wrong with my peach dumpling. I have done nothing but treat her with the love she deserves." Dipper frowned. "I will be the judge of that, because what I saw and heard from her was that while you got special treatment from the staff of the restaurants, she was basically bullied. Her lobster she ordered was left uncooked, before everyone spoke about how it would kill them if she turned you down." Gideon pulled on his shirt collar as he sweat a bit over that accusation. There was also the large number of fireworks that asked her out again, which counts as you asking her in front of everyone in town. Gideon was about to stand up, until he noticed he couldn't move his chair. Looking into Dipper's glowing eyes told him everything he needed to know. Dipper had nothing but the glass of fizzy juice in his hand as he glared, his eyes holding a blue glow similar to his own amulet. "You will continue this little date. I am gonna enjoy a nice meal, and make sure these people are aware who Mabel is, for when she comes here to enjoy their services during a real date." As their meals came, Gideon would have complained over his being slightly colder than it was supposed to be, while Dipper's was perfect. Gideon, however, was still a bit scared from what he has been going through this evening. He was honestly beginning to realize he should have paid more attention to Mabel when she talked about her brother, but he dismissed the boy considering he had the second journal and his amulet. Gideon was a force to be reckoned, until he was going head-to-head with the genuine article. Dipper apparently didn't need an amulet to use powers. While being able to turn his off without being in contact with it, Gideon made another attempt to defend himself. I have done nothing but treat Mabel with love and care. What the waiters and cooks did has nothing to do with me. Dipper glared at him. Mabel is my twin sister, and even before everyone knew I know everything, she believed me, she never doubted, and even bragged about me. She got bullied about it once, only once. But back to you. Gideon would honestly say he didn't want the conversation to return to him. The last date she returned from proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back, because she wound up being miserable when I found her, before Stan made her cry. I returned the favor and caused him misery to the point of crying, and now I am gonna do the same to you. Gideon became somewhat of a nervous wreck. After everything he and his father had done, they merely fueled the man's anger. Nothing his father brought up over their past caused the man to cry. So now, I am here to talk to you about your behavior. Make her cry again, pressure her into another date, or anything, and nothing that Journal 2 tells you will prepare you for what I will do to you. Gideon was now rather pale. How do you know about the journal? Dipper smiled and chuckled as he shook his head. Foolish boy, there are secrets of this world that your little town mind would crumble under the weight of. That, and there's a good deal of misconception in all three journals. The author was kind of one-dimensional in his thinking. Of course, he was also being manipulated by some third-rate demonic Dorito. Cool Ranch flavored. Talk about weak flavor choice, huh? Gideon tucked away the knowledge of there being three journals, the info not being fully reliable, as well as the Pines family having both the other books. Dipper smiled as he stopped the waiter so he could order something as a takeout order for his sister. Dipper had about finished his meal, while Gideon barely started. I will allow Mabel to keep being your friend. But if she comes home crying once more, Gideon, you will crawl on your hands and knees all the way to the shack from your very room to beg for forgiveness. Also, you can simply afford to live. Do you understand me? Gideon would have usually just laughed at the boy, but after the date he just had, he wanted to just crawl into bed and cry. Dipper held all the power. He held all the cards. Dipper knew everything, and he just showed a small smidge of that knowledge. If he could use the same powers his amulet granted himself without the amulet, and turn it off with just a muttered phrase, Gideon knew a fight he couldn't win. He would play by his rules, for now. He would plot and plan exactly how he could get the town to aid him in winning the boy. Dipper suddenly laughed, as if he heard a funny joke. Gideon just realized what he had just thought. Dipper could possibly read his mind. Dipper's smile had too many teeth all of a sudden. Gideon nearly broke when the waiter popped up with a takeout container. Dipper smiled normally at the man, before handing the man some bills, saying to keep the change, and walking out. Remember, Gideon, you might have been a big fish in this little pond, but there are bigger fish out there in the larger oceans. His piece said. Dipper walked out the restaurant, and handed the box to who Gideon noticed was Mabel, a happy smile on her face as she hugged her brother, giving the boy a kiss on the cheek and taking the takeout box. Dipper turned to him and waved as Mabel gave the boy a small fearful smile and a little wave. Dipper's smile took a darker look while Mabel was facing away from him, before turning all sunshine and daisies when she turned back. Upon Gideon returning home, he found Stan and his father Bud, each talking about deals and whatnot. Gideon noticed the tear stains on Stan's cheeks. Gideon just went and laid down to rest, with a haunted look upon his face as he stared at the ceiling. Episode 5 Mabel was just telling Wendy about how Dipper talked Gideon into not asking her out, and how he apologized for upsetting her. Dipper and Seuss were doing some last-minute organizing with the shelf items. Mabel also complained about how there has been a distinct lack of fun, singing, and dancing, ignoring the dance she went to with Gideon, considering she felt uncomfortable during it. Stan came through and told them they needed to clean the toilets. Wendy immediately denied his request while Seuss jumped at the chance to make him happy. Stan smiled and chuckled as he walked out, leaving the four to their jobs. Wendy smirked at Dipper as she chose to tease the boy. So, Mr. Knowledge, do you know what I'm gonna suggest for fun with Stan gone? Dipper just gave the teen a deadpan stare. I have two options depending on what actions have been taken through the choices of the universe. Since you are not completely desperate for love and have yet to show any signs of depravity, I am gonna guess roof time. Wendy just blinked a couple times at the boy. Mabel giggled over the reaction, while Seuss just squinted his eyes, thinking about what else Dipper could be talking about. Wendy nervously chuckled as she walked over to a curtain and pulled it aside. Well, you guessed right. Seuss just gave up on what he was thinking about and acted nervous about Wendy showing the roof access ladder. I don't think Mr. Pines would really like us going up there. Dipper decided to answer. Actually, he wouldn't care, as long as we don't cause damage that will cost him money, and as long as none got hurt. Wendy just shrugged while Seuss looked at Dipper in awe. Mabel was still giggling over Wendy's reaction to Dipper's answer to her teasing. So, everyone minus Seuss, who wanted to finish what Stan asked him to, were on the roof throwing pine cones at a target pinned to the totem pole. Wendy never missed a throw. Mabel couldn't hit a bullseye but didn't really fail too badly. Dipper just dropped the ammo and kicked it, causing the seeds to pepper the target. Wendy gave a shout of encouragement as she raised her hand for a high five. Dipper did reciprocate, but just wasn't as ecstatic as the teen was. Dipper almost appeared bored by this situation, causing some of Wendy's cheer to diminish. Dipper didn't hold any animosity towards her, but after learning everything that he had about Wendy, he could never regain that crush he once had on her. She does hold the record for most times killing him. Dipper would give credit where credit was due. First time he came to conquer Gravity Falls as a villain, she was the one who destroyed his robot army, even going so far as to shout out decapitation as she slashed through his neck. Though she did go into a bit of shock once she learned he was younger than him, when he used a cyborg stand and the second time he tried to do it. He just ended her misery when he shot her in the back of the head. It got to the point where he recognized the girl as his greatest rival. If he was the embodiment of planning and outwit, she embodied the badass heroine. Where he was Batman, she was Wonder Woman. When he became Dr. Evil, she went James Bond on him. All because he had come to Gravity Falls to get some ingredients. If, and when she noticed him, or his men coming into town, her natural need to cause trouble for the man would actually allow her to find out about some of his plans, and she would end up stopping him in some way. Where Pacifica turned out to be his complementary half, someone he honestly came to love after everything he went through and put her through. Wendy became his heroic foil. She never went the villain route, but she would always step up into the role of the hero if he chose to go villain. She even once murdered him and Mabel, along with Pacifica. That one time he got Pacifica as his Dark Queen, and Mabel had chosen him over the world. She was the Sans to his Chara, the Batman to his Joker. She has been the main one to defeat him at multiple points. If the government failed to drop a bomb on his hideout, that is. Wendy noticed her friends driving up and honking to get her attention. She smiled at the two and asked if they could not mention to Stan about her skipping the rest of work. Wendy pulled off some rather impressive parkour, some he knew she could do when he decided to test her once. Wendy has also proven to be the most difficult to court, and never when he took a villainous route. The girl was a goody two-shoes at heart. Even with this rebellious stage of her life, the girl would go hero in a heartbeat if he started to go villain. How much damage killing him causes her depends on how close they become before he goes villain. But she would always go hero on him, always. Mabel tried to ignore the negative feelings coming from her brother. After being so close with him over the years, she has developed an empathic link with him. Not the twin telepathy she wanted, but good enough for her for now, and she has learned over the years how he looks at people. He held a power that no one would want to face. He knew everything about everyone, even things they themselves did not know. So, what is wrong with Wendy? Dipper chuckled. Nothing. She will one day be a great lumberjane, or she will step up to be a hero. It all depends on what life requires of her. Mabel smiled. Does my bro have a crush? Dipper looked at her with a deadpan frown. She is not my type. I prefer a more refined lady. Someone who wouldn't just date any guy and give out as easy as she does. Mabel frowned. Are you calling her a slut? Dipper rolled his eyes. No, I am just saying she lives to be the cool kid, mostly due to the bullying of her past, mostly from her friend Robbie, a loser that can't even deal with his own feelings properly. She is a hurricane of emotion and enjoys the cool status she gained after her awkward preteen years a little too much. She jumps from relationship to relationship far too much, to her. I at most would be a fling, and that is if I even felt like throwing all the necessary work required for her to accept me. What Dipper doesn't mention is that if he was smarter the first time through, he had all the opportunity he needed to court the girl and have a good life with her. He even had one lifetime where she rejected Robbie at the fair later in the summer. All he had to do was play to his advantages. But he would always be too young for her during this time, which would mean she would have several flings between the point of now and when she would accept him. Mabel pouted at him. You do realize with the way society is now, that old-timey way of thinking will leave you lonely through life. It isn't frowned upon so much when girls are open with their desires like it was back in the 50s. Dipper rolled his eyes. She does not have to be pure as the fallen snow for me to go for her. She just does not have to go for every guy that likes her. Wendy is a girl that embodies the ugly duckling story. She has grown some and people are starting to see her plumage for the beauty she can be, which includes all the wrong guys. Mabel frowned further. Is she going to be okay? Dipper chuckled. She will be fine. As I said, she holds the heart of a hero. No man will ever be able to force her into anything. Him having tried multiple times to do just that was left unsaid. Dipper led his sister off to their room. At the same time as Dipper's little monologue, Wendy was chatting up her friends as they drove through town. Wendy went so far to explain Dipper to them. Tambry and Thompson looked to be the only ones that believed her when she told them about his knowledge. Robbie went on about how the kid was just spitting random wrong facts that people would not bother to look up. Lee and Nate were just acting like dorks as they goofed about knowing random things about each other. Wendy rolled her eyes. Dudes, I have witnessed this firsthand. Just today, I asked him what I planned to do before you guys came by, and he guessed correctly. Yeah, he threw in a bit of a dirty joke at first, but he was right, though the way he said the joke kind of threw me off. Tambry chuckled at her. So a 9-year-old threw the coolest gal in our group off? Wendy rolled her eyes again, this time at her main gal pal. First, he is 12. Second, it was the fact that I didn't expect something like that from him. I have been thinking of inviting him and his sister along for one of our misadventures. They are becoming teens at the end of the summer. Who better to welcome them into their own rebellious years than the most rebellious group? Am I right? Nate and Lee were both cool with the choice. Tambry admitted to being curious, while Thompson said he was cool with it. Robbie was the only one that grumbled about the choice. Well, if you all want some brats killing our buzz, then fine, invite them. Wendy started the teasing on Robbie for his pouting. Lee and Nate were the ones who kept it going. Tambry sat there looking at the status of something. Everyone has their complaints. I even tried to order something online from this big-time inventor guy. However, his order page has been put on hold due to some vacation thing. Wendy leaned over and checked it out. Well, maybe Dipper can help you out. He said something about being an inventor. Robbie was the only one to scoff at the statement, but was still thankful that it distracted Nate and Lee, who were now talking about if Dipper was the inventor, and what they could ask him to invent for them with him joining their group. The next day came and went, Mabel still poking fun at Dipper for what he said his type was, Wendy catching on and joining in on the fun, only to stop when Dipper asked her how many guys she dated that Tambry was trying to date, basically asking her how many guys she stole from her best friend, that he has yet to meet. As Wendy stepped back to actually think about her answer, Mabel reprimanded her brother for his careless question. Dipper just rolled his eyes. A lot of that happening in this chapter. Don't worry about it too much, Wendy. The 6 guys you did steal from her only dated you to get into your pants because they saw you as an easy girl. So you technically saved Tambry from being pressured into sex, though now she is a phone blocker that is still a virgin, not counting the 3 nights with you. Wendy didn't feel better. Mabel sighed. You are not helping, bro. Dipper shrugged. Not my fault. Her past shows her more as a girl who wants Tambry all to herself. Wendy's face turned crimson at those words. Well, that brought a couple of her actions into a different light. Mabel groaned. When will you learn not to make people, especially friends, question their life choices? Dipper shrugged. Well, you gotta actually think about these things before opening your mouth. I wouldn't have said anything about her sexuality and taste in boys, the second of which sucks, if she had not tried to tease me about my taste in girls. Mabel didn't have an argument, so she just pouted at him. Dipper was still smirking as Wendy was shaken from her own thoughts by the honk of a car horn from outside. Hey, that reminds me, would you guys like to come hang out with us tonight? I mentioned you to the gang, and they all said it would be cool to meet a guy that knows everything. Mabel had her back turned, so Wendy didn't see her frown when Dipper was the only one mentioned. Mabel never complained, cause when it came down to it, Dipper always chose her. Her brother has told her every time she asks, that he chooses her because she was his heart. Out of context, which had happened before with their parents, that came out as more a proposal than anything, Dipper had explained, to both her and their parents, that he meant that as their type of twins. He even explained that he was her brain. How else could he explain it? He had two brains, explaining how he was so smart. She had two hearts, explaining why she was so loving towards everyone. That's why he told her she had to listen when he gave her warnings about everything, and why she had to keep him from going crazy, because without his heart, he couldn't love anyone. He then proceeded to describe several futures where he was alone and cruel to others, before explaining how her future could turn for a darker future, for simply dating the wrong boy, just because she was too loving. He also spoke about how he was disappointed in his parents for even thinking such bad thoughts about them. Their parents still became embarrassed when he throws out a comment about that. Dipper's thoughts looked back on the timeline where he made Mabel his queen. Like he said before, he has gone through every single type of world he could. That did include the incest route. Pacifica was an interesting encounter that run through, but since then, all Dipper had to do was poke her forehead, and she would cheer right up and poke his chest, right over his heart. It was something that Dipper had started doing, reminding her that she was smart, because he was her brain, and her response was how she said that he was indeed a loving person because she was his heart. You would be surprised how often he was called heartless and cruel for his logical and impersonal responses. He even started to act more distant and emotionless when she was separated from him after their parents had the episode with what he said to her. The fact that Mabel started to actually do worse in school and failed several times at things she had known beforehand helped with Dipper's side of the argument, considering he helped her with keeping her grades up. He explained logically and rather robotically to his parents about things. He has also gone so far as to stop saying the word love. After they let them hang out again, Dipper started to lighten up, and Mabel started to get her grades back up. Of course, Dipper wouldn't mention that Mabel also suffered from depression due to being dragged away from her best friend. That also took some explaining, considering what the adults were telling Mabel that it was bad for her to have a best friend, or with as early as it was, a friend at all. Dipper would accept the blame for the kids bullying them this time around, due to how intelligent he was. They picked on him, he would insult them in a way that left them with headaches and caused them to be confused. There was just something about using mathematical formulas to disorient someone to the point that it affected their physical health. No one wanted to bully the boy that could use magic on them. His sister, however, was not able to do things like that, until he walked over and tore them down verbally to the point they were left crying in the bathroom. Alright, back to the story. Wendy walked forward. While raising a brow at the action between them, she chuckled when she noticed their chipper moods and tossed the exchange as one of their twin things she would learn from her mistake not even a minute ago. Wendy chose to hug Mabel from behind and pick her up as the girl squealed and giggled as Wendy tossed her over her shoulder. Well, since you want to question my preferences, I will just take this little lady with me. You can walk, Mr. Knows-It-All. Dipper chose to let that slide as Mabel just giggled and blew a raspberry at her brother over Wendy's shoulder, both knowing Wendy was just goofing around. Dipper followed the two out to the teens and van, as they all just laughed at the roughhousing. Dipper stepped forward when he heard Wendy introduce her captive to the teens, and even called him out as he approached. Robbie is the one who interrupted Wendy. If the squirt knows everything, why not let him introduce us to his sister? Dipper just smirked, interrupting Wendy before she could say anything. Okay, Robbie. Everyone stood slightly straighter at his response, with Robbie muttering, lucky guess. Our driver is named Thompson. You introduce him by mentioning he once ate a waffle for 5 cents. However, he is the glue that holds your group together, allowing you all to bully him in exchange for your friendship. The two giggling girls are Lee and Nate. Lee has the blonde locks while Nate wears the cap, and that leaves Tambry as the one on her phone. Each of the teens stared in shock, even if Wendy mentioned her friends, and talked enough to give enough names. Knowing that much without an introduction was surprising. Wendy smirked at her friends. Told you so. Mabel giggled at their reactions, before she looked at her brother. Why so much about Thompson? You mentioned several things. Dipper shrugged, didn't want the first impression to be bad. He is like Lefou from Beauty and the Beast. Nate, after laughing off being called a giggling girl, chuckled again. If Thompson is Lefou, who is Gaston? Robbie scoffed, before he was interrupted by Dipper. No, Robbie, it's not you, it's Wendy. Everyone laughed at that. Lee decided to tease him further. Well, then I guess that makes him Belle? Nope. Dipper's immediate response actually killed Lee and Nate's chuckles a bit as they stared at him, probably waiting for his answer to their unasked question. Belle would be Tambry. Mabel giggled as she jumped up and down in excitement. What about me? What about me? Dipper chuckled. You would be Lumiere, and before you ask, I would be more Cogsworth. Tambry hid behind her phone a bit more than usual, trying to hide how her cheeks were a bit pink. Wendy noticed how this kinda tied into their own little teasing earlier, but she had to ask. And the 3 guys you haven't named? Claudette, Laurette, and Paulette. But seeing as each of you are staring in confusion, they are the 3 blondes that fawn over Gaston, commonly referred to as the Bimbettes. The guys each stared at the boy, jaws dropped. Tambry was still doing her best to hide behind her phone, her face now red from trying not to laugh. Thompson walked over to Wendy and to play along with the goofing about. Well, Wendy, have you put any thought into which one you want when Tambry rejects you? Thompson enjoyed it when he wasn't the butt of the joke. Tambry failed to hold in the laughter from that, and Wendy also failed to hold back her laughter when Lee and Nate played into the joke by pretending to swoon and try to bat their eyelashes at her, both playing into Thompson's joke for the fun of it. The only one that didn't exactly have a lot of fun was Robbie, and that was because he didn't want to admit he also wanted to laugh at it all. He was mostly angry that he was labeled as a bimbet in the joke. Wendy gave a shout for everyone to jump into the van so they can actually go cause chaos, rather than sow it amongst their own numbers. The boys, this time including Robbie, goofed around still by muttering lines from the mob's song. As Mabel hopped into the far back and scushed to the far side, Tambry climbed in next to her, and even pulled Dipper into her lap to allow Nate to sit next to her when Lee had sat in the center seat, allowing enough room for Wendy to sit comfortably instead of the 3 squeezing into said seat. Robbie took notice. You do know that him and his sister could have squeezed into the far back with Lee and Nate. They are all practically 2 sets of siblings anyways. Dipper was honestly caught off guard this time around. He had never expected Tambry to appreciate his comment towards her looks to mean so much. Tambry just stared at Robbie. I have no trouble holding on to someone that is barely 2/3 my size, especially when he would make an awesome little bro. Tambry barely mentioned it, but she would honestly like a sibling. And someone so smart would actually be perfect. Wendy chuckled at this. Well, with Tambry snagging Dipper, I guess that leaves Mabel with me. Wendy stuck her tongue out at Dipper, still trying to get some vengeance for his earlier comments about her and Tambry. Dipper grumbled as Tambry giggled and knocked his hat off to run her fingers through his hair. Nate and Lee chose to poke fun and say that their Cogsworth just jumped up to being beast. Dipper could only blush as Tambry continued to mess with his hair, the teens all being too busy with guessing where Wendy was leading them to notice when Tambry brushed her fingers through Dipper's bangs. She revealed his birthmark. Mabel had a smile that was all teeth as she watched Dipper get pampered by the teen girl. I told you that you could flirt, Dippy. Tambry just rolled her eyes at the girl, ignoring their conversation as she busied herself with watching her friend's reaction. Nate looked to be trying his best to ignore her pampering the boy. His crush on her was kind of annoying. What good was it to have a guy like you if he did not have the guts to say it? Thompson obviously paid more attention to the road, but she knew he would not care much for the situation. He probably knew what she was doing. Lee looked to not care at all, just focusing on pestering Wendy about where they were heading. Wendy and Robbie didn't look to be paying attention either. Tambry's attention was brought back to Dipper as she felt his head flop back slightly, fully resting between her hand and shoulder. Mabel's giggles drew her attention. I don't mention it to him, but running your fingers through his hair is a quick way to get him to sleep. I found out one day after school. We had several tests and it stressed me out. They never stressed him out with how much he knows. I, on the other hand, just wound up laying down on the couch as he sat in front of me playing his game. By now, everyone was paying attention to her. It had gotten hot, so he wasn't wearing his hat, and I just started to run my fingers through his hair. Mom once said she does it to Dad's curly hair to help her de-stress. I didn't understand how affectionate that actually was back then, but it did teach us that Dipper's off button is in his hair. Thompson, Wendy, and Tambry thought the story was adorable. Nate and Lee even chuckled over the cute tale. Robbie acted like he didn't care, but if you saw his face, you could tell he was a bit envious about the situation. Now he wished he had some sibling-friendly tales to share, but he had no siblings. Thompson just pulled up to the gate that blocked off the dusk to Dawn's store, Wendy giving it as big an introduction as she could as they all got out. Mabel helped Tambry wake Dipper up by booping his nose. Apparently, Dipper's on switch was his nose. Poor boy was confused when everyone chuckled at him. As Wendy explained the story behind the store, Dipper interrupted them when they got to what happened to the owners. It was simultaneous heart attacks from hateful rap music that teens played when they banned them from their store. Having got their attention, their ghosts are still there, angry and hateful at any teens that come near, and they will torment you if you enter. The teens all started to laugh, before the chuckles died down as they became slightly nervous. Robbie just scoffed, "Whatever, I bet there isn't anything to be scared of." Robbie proceeded to climb the fence and get over. Lee and Nate were the first to shrug and join him, while Thompson went next. Wendy decided to show off a bit, and kicked off a tree as she managed to get high enough to make it over easy. Tambry and Mabel were about to try to climb over as well, before they noticed Dipper lifting a small rock, revealing a small hole in the bottom, that he pulled a key from. The ones that were already over stared in shock. Robbie was the first to snap. "Why didn't you mention that there was a key there before we all climbed over?" Dipper shrugged. "No one asked, and you all looked to be having fun." Dipper, Mabel, and Tambry were each allowed to just walk in as if they owned the place, ignoring the exasperated looks from the others that had to climb the fence. At the next obstacle, they all just looked to Dipper. Dipper looks back. It's locked. Wendy and Tambry were the first to break the stare as they just laughed. Nate and Lee may have lasted longer, but they had a bigger reaction. Thompson chuckled as Robbie rolled his eyes. "We could have guessed that, genius." Mabel has been all giggles since Dipper grabbed the key from the rock. Dipper pulled out 2 magnets from his pocket, along with a card. Grabbing a piece of thread from Mabel, Dipper tied it around one of the magnets before sliding it under the door. As he slid the card partially under and lifting it up, and proceeded to use the other magnet to drag the magnet on the inside up to the lock. The teens watched in awe as Dipper maneuvered the magnet to drop onto the bolt lock on the inside. Dipper reached into his pocket once more as Mabel takes hold of the string. The teens were surprised once again when Dipper pulls a journal out of his vest pocket, opening to Asserting page and pulling a smallish wire hanger from in between its pages. Taking the wire hanger apart to thin it out, the teens watched Dipper put the head of the hanger through and maneuvered the string to tie the magnet to the deadbolt key. With the magnet tied to the deadbolt key, Dipper pulled out a stronger magnet, and proceeded to make the door unlock itself. The teens just stared at the boy. Thompson was the one that cracked first. "How did that work?" Dipper just shrugged as he smiled at them and took a bow. The group were officially able to enter the store, the teens continuing to just compare the boy to several scientific geniuses. As Lee and Nate switched to comments about the store itself and the lights, Dipper walked straight to the light switch and flipped it. Lee decided to ask about the bodies since Dipper knew everything. "The graveyard, put to rest after the incident. However, what I believe you mean is the tape outlines of where they died, which is behind the register counter." As the teens looked, they proceeded to shrug as they went and checked out the store, apparently, after meeting a kid who knew everything, and had even told them the story kind of left them just wanting to goof off and have some fun. Dipper warned Mabel about the smile dip, and he did not hold back the info on it, which kind of caused Lee and Nate to want to try some, so Mabel, Lee, and Nate each ate some and Tambry recorded the after effects, which involved Mabel talking about some buff dolphin named Aoshima. Lee wound up doing the Henry Stickman dance, while Nate did a ballet. Each of them looked to be having fun, while the only one to not be doing anything funny was Mabel since she just sat there and talked to invisible friends. Lee and Nate, however, wound up going through several different dances, having even danced with each other every other dance. Tambry now had a video of the two doing the boat scene from Titanic. As they continued to go through their drug trips, the rest went off to find something else to do. There was only so much entertainment one can get from watching a little girl talk to things not there, or 2 idiots dancing. Some would disagree on the second one though. Tambry, however, didn't want to fill her phone up with nothing but dancing fails by 2 drug dorks. And yes, that is what she called the videos she posted of them. Robbie was learning that he took the 2 dorks for granted when he was left with just Thompson to find something to do. Dipper started to hand everyone bracelets around this time. Tambry, Wendy, and Thompson, seeing no harm, just wore them. Nate and Lee were still too out of it as he just strapped theirs to their wrists. Mabel and he already had one on, while Robbie started to tease the boy. Looks like the little genius decided to give out friendship bracelets. Dipper shrugged. "Actually, they are ghost repellent. They will protect you when the ghosts decide to attack when you start to destroy stuff." Robbie scoffed, about to just throw the bracelet at the kid. When the place shook, Robbie immediately put the bracelet on. Wendy was the one to speak up as she looked at several things beginning to float. "Maybe we should go. If the ghosts are actually there and do plan to kill us because of what some teens did in the past, I would rather not destroy their stuff." Tambry nodded, in full agreement of avoiding joining the dead couple. Tambry, Wendy, and Thompson walked over to get their idiots as Dipper was getting Mabel. Robbie watched as his friends were all chickening out, mostly from what the kids said before. Are we seriously going to believe some twerp that believes in ghosts, when we all know there is no such thing? Wendy, this was your idea. Wendy sighed. I know it was my idea. And we all came to have fun. We got to watch these two make idiots of themselves at least. But if us being here much longer is gonna make us targets for the undead, we should really err on the side of caution. Robbie scoffed, before a box of cereal smacked him in the back of the head, while every single one of his friends were in front of him. Dipper waved. Hey Ma and Pa Duskerton. The two ghosts were left a bit confused at the generally nice greeting. The teens followed suit, trying to be nice so they would be left alone. Ma took a close look at each of them. Well, you each appear to be more polite than I thought, all besides that boy with the fake coloring in his hair. Robbie groaned. Yes, I dye my hair, I admit it. Pa frowned at the boy. You should really watch your tone, young man. Just because what the little boy gave you is keeping us from using our powers on you, doesn't mean we can't still punish you. Wendy blinked. So what you're saying is, that you tried to attack us already? Pa chuckled. Well, obviously, the only real thing we can do right now is alter the store around you. But considering the boy already knows about us, and he even did that fancy trick at the door, Ma interrupted him here, which really impressed us, but kind of upset us. Pa spoke up. Well, we couldn't really scare you away like we normally would, so we decided to just kick you out. Ma, we would have tortured you to teach you a lesson for breaking in, but as we said, can't affect you. The teens nodded as they dragged the two drugged boys out, hoping the ghosts stuck to their word and let them leave. Dipper turned to look at the two as the teens were about out. Thanks for not hurting them. Ma and Pa just smiled as both muttered to each other, what a nice boy. Wendy just stared at the store as they shoved the two boys into the back, Robbie plopping into the passenger seat, as Tambry sat in the back next to Nate and Lee, who were actually getting over their high. Well, this could have gone better. Dipper shrugged. You're telling me I didn't get to drop any ice down Robbie's pants before they kicked us out? Wendy rolled her eyes as she messed with his hat. Dipper went about locking the gate back up and returning the key to the rock as Wendy hopped into the car. Tambry pulled Dipper into the back and on her lap again for the ride back to the shack to drop them off. Mabel just continued to giggle as the older girl chose to tease her brother. Apparently rubbing his hair had a calming effect for some people. Hopefully this didn't become a... Dipper was asleep before he could finish the thought. Dipper was so glad he could just ignore the whole situation with Humanitors. He will go and visit the multi-bear for tea on occasion, but the Manitors were just obnoxious. He recalls when he became so annoyed with them, he set off a bomb under their mountain and buried the lot of them. Or that time he filled their cave with lava. Or the time he caused their mountain to collapse into a chasm with his earthquake machine. He was just realizing how often he has taken to murdering them guys. Dipper was now just building the machine to cover the check-in. The guests would buy their tickets from one machine at the corner of the building outside, before entering the checkpoint at the door. The checkpoint consisted of a small room, where you would be able to open the door to enter as soon as you insert your ticket. If the number of tickets do not match the number of guests that are in the checkpoint, they will be shoved back out, and forced to repurchase the ticket. The moral of today? Don't try to con a conman that has a famous inventor under his employ. Dipper had informed everyone beforehand that goofing with him was out of the question while he was working on the machine, so no silly string shenanigans with him. That didn't stop Mabel and Wendy from goofing around. Mabel had started referring to Wendy in a familial manner recently. Good thing Dipper had no plans to go crazy this timeline. Dipper remembered the timeline he died. While he was young, he got his hands on an invisibility potion. He also remembered when he did it, and only spoke when he was alone with Mabel. His parents were always left baffled when she mentioned that her imaginary friend told her all the little secrets there was to know. He also enjoyed watching what Mabel did with all that knowledge. If left alone, Mabel gave Pinkie Pie a run for her money as a party girl, but he was also able to manipulate her into other paths. He tried that with Wendy once. That girl was so boring and predictable. After realizing he only responded when she was alone, she continued to try and trick him into revealing who he actually was. He wound up playing the ghost card during one run-through, but she never really asked him much of anything. The girl never cheated, nor was she dumb enough to need him to give her the answers. There were a couple times she asked for a little help with this or that, but she never took advantage of having an imaginary friend that knew everything. She did ask for a little, but never took advantage. He almost died from boredom that run-through. Wait, I was talking about the familial relation, right? Well, each timeline Dipper was not with Mabel. Wendy usually jumped into the role of a big sister. Dipper suspects that with as many brothers as the girl has, She always wished she wasn't the only girl in her house, so she would latch onto a sister that needed a sibling. Mabel took timelines where he wasn't there rather harshly, usually with varying levels of angst or misery. As Dipper finished the check-in machines, he proceeded to start handling the potions, and seeing the chance for adding to the fun. "Hey Wendy, I just had a brilliant idea." As Wendy came over and listened to the boy, she slowly gained a grin. As Dipper spoke of his plan to Wendy, he also had to stop Mabel from wanting in on that plan, as he already had a plan for her and him to enact. Wendy could be heard laughing as Stan continued with his checklist to make sure everything went smoothly. Equals dash 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 equals party time equals dash 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 equals. Dipper stood next to Seuss as the man DJ'd, setting up several vials of potions. Dipper took notice of Mabel meeting her girls, who Dipper didn't tell her about, so she would be honestly surprised when she met them. Although Dipper did get into the habit of telling her when she was gonna meet someone bad for her, him not warning her about Gideon was simply because the boy was no real threat. Dipper would actually refer to Gideon as a good person if he worked on it. If Wendy was his eternal counterweight, Gideon was the mini-boss in the game, where Wendy became Mr. Incredible. Gideon was Buddy. Gideon would try to help, and a good portion of the time he would. Dipper had gone through a timeline where he made Gideon his heroic foil. It was akin to face Ronstoppable. While Kim Possible or Wendy swooped in to save the day, he used a lot of robot stand-ins, because he couldn't keep a straight face as he watched Gideon stumble through his traps. Still couldn't find a way to keep Wendy from interfering with him tormenting the boy. He blames his henchmen. Not even through the very multiverse he himself created could he find or even build good help. Besides this one guy, Jared, never having a last name, but the guy usually had freshly baked cookies waiting in the break room without fail. He also made sure that every flower in the base was fresh. He never failed his tasks and always made that extra effort to make sure things went smoothly. But he wasn't a guy you send on missions outside the base. Poor guy dies too easily. But he did his best. Sometimes Dipper misses Jared. But back to the party. Dipper was actually given his chance to interact with Pacifica, as she demanded the party crown, and cue Mabel jumping in to defend her girls. Pacifica was honestly surprised when the boy that was messing with whatever vials he was messing with turned and introduced himself. "Hello Pacifica Elise Northwest." Pacifica took a step back when she got a good look at the boy. Her age, well-maintained form, no slouching, which shows he commonly stands straight, showing a level of confidence. He also had rather nice curly hair, and even though he was most likely 12, his arms show signs of muscle. All in all, a good specimen of the male form. And the knowledge she could see in his eyes was rather refreshing when compared to the lack of it within the eyes of the normal boys she sees around town, or in her private school. Dipper smiled as he saw the spark in her eye that let him know she liked what she was looking at, while checking him out. As he mentioned briefly before, she could be considered his soulmate, the easiest to court, the most loyal, seeing as she always joins him no matter his path, and she didn't mind being with both him and Mabel when he chose to be with his sister. Pacifica was actually the hardest to make his foil. He has tried, and the closest he got was the timeline where after he foiled himself by allowing both Wendy and Gideon to help her, she wound up kidnapping him, patching him up, and keeping him in her closet for the rest of his life, where she made sure he lived a long, healthy, and even happy life. It was a very awkward talk with the kids when they found their daddy, who they hadn't met, chained to the wall when they were looking for Christmas presents. Fun fact, that was the first time he became a family secret, the supervillain in the closet. Daddy was in timeout for trying, and almost succeeding, in ruling the world. Dipper had to give himself a quick shake to get his head in the game. If you are wondering, these potions are the ones I crafted for the Potion Master attraction, where me and my twin sister here drinks a pair that the townsfolk have voted on. Pacifica did in fact look interested as she started to ignore the whole thing about the party crown. "So what ones are you drinking?" Dipper smiled. "We were about to drink them after Seuss starts the competition." Pacifica smiled here. "Well, since he did just that, are you going to?" Pacifica, as Dipper has discovered, is indeed a nerd, as people like to call him. She has shown fascination with many of the experiments that he conducts throughout many of his timelines. She is a smart girl that is forced to be cruel by her parents. She is not evil, just raised that way. She embodies the heart of a princess, his damsel in distress when he is a hero, his Belle when he goes beast, or Gaston in some cases. That is why they mix so well. They are both intelligent kids, he just has more freedom, which draws her to him on an unconscious level. Dipper has been reminiscing an awful lot about Pacifica. We will be. When Mabel goes to sing her song for the competition, till then, it's a surprise. Pacifica gave the boy a cute pout as he walked over to the group of older teens not too far away. Pacifica almost jumped out of her skin when she turned and saw Mabel with a huge smile as she shifted her eyes between her and Dipper. What? Mabel giggled slightly. Someone has a crush. That was the friendliest I have ever seen him with a gal, even with Wendy, the coolest gal we have met so far. He acts somewhat bored. Pacifica smirked. Well, of course he would be excited to meet me. Mabel scoffed. Yes, I misspelled it on purpose. Mabel finds scoffing to be too rude and or mean, so she scoffs. Girl, my bro knows everything. And I mean everything. He knows all about you. And he just showed you that he is willing to tease you. He usually reserves that to fight against people who tease him. He rips people apart when he doesn't like them. Or they make me cry. He teases back when he enjoys your company. You are the first person he has ever teased unprovoked. This is a big step forward for him. Pacifica chuckled over the girl's enthusiasm, basically taking it as approval to date her brother if she pursued. Pacifica would have scoffed at any other person saying that to her, but she was forced to admit. The boy caught her interest in a way no one ever has, and plenty have tried. She was almost tempted to grab one of the potions and drink it to prove it wasn't gonna do anything but wanted a chance to tease the boy as payback for what he just did. Speaking of Dipper, he was with Wendy, talking with her friends. I dare you guys to sing karaoke under the effects of a potion I brewed. I made some extras. Wendy had expressed her excitement to do so, while Nate and Lee were both excited as well. Robbie was basically the only wild card, which is why they offered it as a dare instead of, say, asking. Robbie accepted the challenge as a way to prove the boy couldn't create real potions. Wendy had the plan explained to her, so she actually knew what she was going to do and came prepared. Tambry was the only one that noticed what she did to prepare. Dipper chuckled. I only have 4 spares, so Tambry and Thompson don't have to drink one. Wendy was all smiles as the 3 boys started to kind of regret accepting so fast, cursed their need for random chaos. Dipper had to walk over and give Seuss the rundown over how the night was going to go. Seuss was actually doing this better than he would have, considering Dipper made him a cheat sheet for the buttons on his DJ stand. Dipper was the coolest in his opinion. Seuss smiled as he lowered the music. Alright ladies, dudes, and everything in between, we have a short karaoke section before and after the contest. Before there is a song, sung by our own rowdy gaggle of troublemakers, Wendy, Thompson, Lee, Nate, and Robbie. Tambry just continued to smirk as she sat off to the side of the stage. Dipper and Mabel were also up there. Dipper was the one to explain. So, I made some potions, some are extra for these guys. But so the surprise will be for everyone all at once. Me and Mabel will be drinking ours at the same time. Then these guys will get the stage all to themselves as we wait our turn. On Mabel's count to 3, the twins, Wendy, Lee, Nate, and Robbie all drank the potions. Wendy shook her head slightly as she gained a couple inches, a bit of muscle mass, and lost 2 distinct lumps on her chest. As she chuckled, you could tell the difference in her voice. When he flexed, you could hear the tearing of his shirt. Wendy went from being an athletic long-legged babe, to being your typical manly red-headed lumberjack, who was going to need a new shirt before she drank the antidote. As a girl, Wendy's strong point in her looks were her legs, and now as a man, he had pecs and a jawline that made ladies swoon. Lee and Nate had to be told, and slapped twice, to stop touching themselves. You can play with yourselves later, in private, before you take the antidote to turn you back. Lee hadn't changed in height, but his hair did shorten. While his figure became a bit more flexible, his chest did grow, but not a whole lot. Her butt, on the other hand, became honestly slappable, which she did indeed slap, until Tambry slapped him upside the head to stop. Nate had lost a couple inches when he drank the potion, and maybe a couple pounds in the back. She did, however, have a larger size in her chest as Lee, which she bragged to her about, before Tambry once again slapped her upside the head, where her hair lengthened to just below her shoulder blades. Lee wound up with about a high B, low C, whereas Nate had a good high D cup. Robbie, however, took the cake with her looks, having shortened slightly, not to the extent that Nate did. Her hair lengthened slightly longer than Nate's, which caused her natural blonde hair to show, it now going down her back, the black being about 7 inches from the end that landed right above her butt, which bubbled slightly, not to the extent of Lee. But she did indeed have a nice ass. Robbie stood mortified over what happened, as she tried to hide her now double D breasts. Her broken heart hoodie was now more literal for those looking at her. Mabel, having pulled her braces out, with them being a removable for easy cleaning that Dipper made for her, looked every inch a boy you would expect. Her hair had shrunk, and keeping just as curly, giving her more of a poofy style. His figure had shifted slightly, or as slightly as his budding female body was, and now stood with somewhat more muscle than Dipper had as a boy. Where Dipper was geared towards knowledge and wisdom, showing in a slimmer, but still athletic build, Mabel showed her active and extensive lifestyle, with her male form being slightly broader shoulders and even having a thicker jawline than Dipper. Where Dipper showed more signs of being a wizard, Mabel showed more signs towards a knightly physique. Dipper's transformation started with his hair lengthening down to his waistline and straightening out, his hair even wound up sliding down in front of his left eye, giving him a shy look. Her cheekbones actually raised slightly, and his chin somewhat slimmed, barely noticeable with how young he was, but did give him a more regal appearance. You could see signs of him being an early bloomer if you looked, but once again, with her age, barely noticeable, until she raised her arms and stretched, pushing her chest out in a way that was clearly noticeable. Dipper decided to speak up after she dropped her arms. Well, there you have it, gender swapping won the little poll. I hope this proves that I didn't just plan to put on a dress as a way to trick everyone. Everyone, including Stan, all stared in shock over what they just saw. Robbie decided to snap at the now girl. What on earth was going through your head when you set this shit up? Robbie would have continued to yell at the twerp, if she wasn't getting cat calls from the audience when her chest bounced as she threw her arms around. No wonder girls wore bras. She could feel the stares of several guys drilling holes into her chest. Dipper shrugged. It was for fun. I did have you each give me some hair to whip up an antidote, so right after your song number, you can drink it and change back. Robbie in all honesty lost a lot of her anger after talking with the girl, though mostly because it was turning to the guys that were there and staring so much at her. Maybe that's why girls could just shrug off negative things so much. They had practiced ignoring the pigs that stare at them constantly. Wendy stepped up to the mic before Robbie could get started again, bringing attention to her new half-foot taller height. That actually caught Robbie's attention. Over her retries, Dipper had actually noticed how Robbie is most of the times, if left alone, without him, or Mabel's love potion shenanigans. Wendy actually does straighten out Robbie, while Tambry usually ends up dating Thompson. Robbie's rebellious attitude could all be blamed on his parents actually. Not that they are bad people, but when a child reaches their teenage years, and they are one of those kids that enter a rebellious stage, 'cause not all kids do, they need to rebel against something. Usually the parents are their targets, and the child will usually grow out of the phase when they get it out of their system and learn their lessons about why rules are there. Robbie has grown up with very supportive parents, and they support him in his rebellious hobbies, but he can't rebel properly against support, which causes him to rebel on a larger scale towards authority. Robbie can't learn his life lessons if he can't get his rebellious nature out of his system. The blind eye weren't helping with making everyone idiots either, making it slightly easier to break rules, but also harder to rebel against the man. And yes, that is why the teens of Gravity Falls are more rebellious than anywhere else. Hard to rebel against the man when the cops that are supposed to stop you chuckle over your antics before grabbing a roll of TP and joining you and throwing it around their yard. Back to what Wendy was saying though. Well, we got our song to sing. Thompson, start us off. Wendy pointed towards the front of the stage, where Thompson looked to find a karaoke machine for him to read. Thompson, as soon as he realized what song he was looking at, began his lines. I am gonna just let you all play the song on YouTube or something. Just gonna describe what they're doing. Thompson began to do the speaking part. He fit into the role as if he was born to play that part. While not matching the original artist perfectly, you could tell the boy was enjoying it. Lee and Nate were all smiles when they realized what song they were singing, both pulling Robbie over to get him to enjoy it as well. Robbie almost blew his top when things started, but as Dipper came over and pulled him back a step, he explained, Look at Wendy, you feel anything with her as a him? A head shake. That's because you're still you, just with a different body. Have fun with your friends, and you will get the potion to turn you back. If you want to experiment with yourself later at home, that is your business, but you can drink the potion whenever, dude. Robbie just smiled as he listened. Considering he was also speaking with a guy that was going through the same effects as himself, it kind of did comfort him. He also looked at each of his friends as they goofed around. Lee and Nate had sat on the bench, patiently waiting for their part. Robbie gave his usual smirk and shrug as he went to join his fellow Bimbettes, just in time for them to pull him into a group hug as they sang their part. Wendy did in fact manage to lift them up with relative ease, though she had to use both arms to hold it, and also couldn't keep it up as well as Gaston in the movie did. Wendy took a little too much pleasure in the hairline, ripping her shirt the rest of the way off. How many girls can say they tore their shirt off in front of a crowd without it being perverted or dirty? Wendy was enjoying herself. When Dipper came to her with this idea, she had thought it would end up being more of a gender-bent rendition, but he revealed that he could allow her to experience it this way, and she found the idea to be hilarious. Who needs haunted stores when you could experience something like this? It brings a whole new meaning to walking a mile in someone else's shoes. Walking and moving around with something dangling down below was a whole new experience as she sang with her friends, and she even noticed Robbie enjoying himself. Having a chance to experience something with no consequences like this was rather exhilarating. Dipper said if Thompson or Tambry wanted to take a potion, he could go whip some up for them, but she doubted Tambry would want to. Thompson was a wild card for it, but he might not be comfortable with it, to be honest. They already bully him enough as is. Lee and Nate were always up for anything and everything new, kind of why they ate some of that smile dip at dusk to dawn. Robbie, while being a bit of a wild card himself, would also be easy to break down and have fun. Robbie might deny it, but he was as rambunctious as Lee and Nate. He might have joined them in eating the smile dip if they hadn't been kicked out. Robbie was a party dude right along with those two deep down. Dipper and Mabel were just sitting off to the side with Tambry, who was recording the performance. Doing this actually reminded Dipper of the times he made him this potion to live life as a girl. He had gotten the ingredients, drank the potion in the garage. Before causing an explosion that put him in the hospital, the doctors would tell them their daughter was alright, and they would look at Mabel and argue with the doctors about his gender. They would go check on him and see he was indeed a girl, and he would explain that he was experimenting with science, and the backlash changed his gender. He got banned from practicing chemical experiments a lot those timelines, though Mabel was always ecstatic with having a sister. As the gang was calming down from their song, as well as the applause and cat calls, he teens turned to Dipper as he walked by and placed a potion into each of their hands. The dare was to sing a song with Wendy under the effects of the potion, so here are your guys' antidotes. Take them whenever you wish. Me and Mabel are the only ones that are stuck like this for the weekend due to our contract with the attraction I set up. I do have a spare potion that will change you back if anything happens to that one, so don't feel pressured into drinking it right away in fear of losing it. Nate and Lee wound up jumping a bit, which reminded them of their extra weight on their chests. Robbie stared at the potion for a few seconds before pocketing it. If some 12-year-old can tough being a girl out for a weekend, so can I. Robbie may have scoffed over the remark, but he still had a smile. Apparently, the boy was getting competitive with him. Dipper chuckled. Does that mean I should add in a third potion whenever I make me and Mabel ours for my attraction? Robbie's quick and simple answer was no. Guess his competitive nature stopped there. While the teens got off the stage, Pacifica was called up for the competition, though Dipper and Mabel both noticed she kept looking Dipper over. I am not gonna change her song, she did everything the same. Pacifica passed the mic off to Mabel, who turned and winked at her two new friends. This is for you girls. With the potion having taken effect on Mabel's voice, the two practically swooned. Though they were able to recover rather quickly, they did recall that the guy winking at them was indeed a girl. It still made them feel special, and even a bit appreciated. Mabel inserted a CD into her karaoke machine, built by Dipper, and sang the song Soldier at War by Ben Wiggins. Mabel had listened to this song before, and somewhat dreamed of a guy singing it for her. A strong, handsome man in the zombie apocalypse, singing that he would protect her. Yeah, Dipper sang it for her, and even introduced her to the band. But she still wanted a manly guy to sing it specially for her. Mabel had plenty of criteria she wanted of her boyfriend, and one was for him to be willing to sing for her. Well, she could at least sing a song as a guy for her two new friends. Maybe they had similar wish lists. Dipper listened to her brother sing, even doing a flip properly, like she taught him. Yes, she did indeed teach Mabel an assortment of things to prevent her from being embarrassed. This was honestly not their first time drinking a potion like this in this timeline. In order to teach Mabel the importance of being too nice, He allowed Mabel to invite people over to his lab and tried to get them to buy stuff. They took advantage of her free sample style. Needless to say, he was glad he snagged some hair from them when they entered, because when their parents came by and demanded he fix them, while Mabel cried from the experience, he just administered the antidote with a painful injection into the butt. Needless to say, parents were angry, and their own figured Dipper needed some time away from his lab as a punishment. Too bad they sent him to a larger lab with more and better ingredients. As Mabel was done with their song, Sue stepped forward. "Alright, my party troopers, if you look off to your left here, you will see a machine that looks similar to an arcade machine. Our resident genius set it up, somehow knowing there would only be 2 competitors beforehand. But take a quick trip over and press a button for your vote. Each button needs a full hand to count your vote, and it scans your hand to prevent cheating. Then we will be listening to a song sung by Dipper and Mabel as our final song, then I will play you out." Dipper watched as everyone went over and threw in their votes. He also noticed how Pacifica twitched a bit, believing that while she did great, and she did, she knew her song wasn't as unique as Mabel's. Pacifica also realized that Mabel had an advantage over her, due to the genre of songs they chose. While hers was impressive, it was tuned more towards high-end audiences, while Mabel's was towards party people. She should have chosen a different song. Pacifica chose not to step over and vote, as Dipper stepped up behind her. "I hope you're having fun." Pacifica jumped a bit, turning to look at Dipper, and blushing as how close she had leaned in. Dipper's female form was rather alluring, for their age. I already feel bad enough being a 32-year-old commenting on how Dipper looked like as a girl the first time. Use your imagination, because I am done talking about preteens in this sense. Pacifica was about to ask why she wasn't off voting, when Dipper interrupted. "I am not over there voting, because I made the machine. There is already controversy with my sister competing. I don't want to add to it. Everyone gets 1 vote, and I don't want people thinking I rigged my machine." Pacifica nodded. Dipper smiled at the girl. Dipper thought back on the first time he appeared as a girl in Gravity Falls. Pacifica tried to do the whole popular girl shtick, up until he, or rather she, fought back, a lot of the time. When Dipper changed himself to female and wound up with Pacifica, it wound up an ASM-style relationship. Pacifica is a bit of a masochist. Pacifica would be lured in, first out of curiosity, then they wound up just desiring one another. Pacifica just brought out her inner dominatrix. This is later, when they are adults, nothing to do with kids. Dipper just stepped back when she heard Seuss hollering for her, "See you later, girl." Pacifica shivered as Dipper let her hand trail along her arm as she stepped away. Seuss was having a blast as he heard several people comment on his DJ style. Dipper had said that as long as he used the terms from his own personal DJing book, rather than the one he wanted to buy, that Dipper stopped him from wasting his money on, he would do great. How Dipper knew what keyboard he was using, he didn't say. Seuss spoke up into the mic attached to his keyboard. "Alright, one final song from our 2 hosts of the night, and we can start settling things down as I play you off home." Dipper grabbed a mic. With Mabel borrowing Seuss, Dipper had selected this song, specifically due to Pacifica's responses to it in previous timelines. As he said earlier, Pacifica has had very interesting reactions when she dominated her, and this had been one of her favorites, especially when both twins sang it for her. "Getting Stronger," by Gabriel Brown and Michelle Kreber. Throughout the song, Dipper might have danced around with Mabel, but her eyes would always return to staring Pacifica in her own. Pacifica couldn't explain exactly why she couldn't help getting hot and bothered. Pacifica couldn't get the girl out of her head after that, even as Mabel was announced the winner and they were, as Seuss said, played out. Pacifica continued to think about the girl and that song. Then the picture changed, and Mabel was replaced by Dipper's male form. That night Pacifica couldn't sleep as she stared at her ceiling, thinking about the new boy in town. Dipper was still a girl, planning to take the antidote later in the night. She was wearing an old-timey dress, being complimented quite a bit over how lovely she fitted. The teen gang had chosen to stay as the gender swap for the full weekend. They continued to go by their usual names, though Nate and Lee goofed around with several ideas for the names they could go by. Lee's favorite was when the 2 wound up calling him Leia, the 2 obviously trying to keep the first letter of their names. Wendy was commonly called Wendell by them, Robbie was Roberta, and Nate was Natasha. They were honestly disappointed when Dipper insisted that she could stay Dipper, because it was a nickname, and he even showed them his birthmark to prove that her name wouldn't change even if his gender did. They wound up calling Mabel Mason. Dipper and Mabel both laughed over their choice, while the teens joined in after they explained why. Dipper was right with his guesses on Tambry and Thompson not wanting to take a potion, so they were still their original genders. The full gang was all together as they were heading about the town, everyone dressing as if it was back in 1863. Dipper had warned their grunkle about what day it was, seeing as this was a day that Dipper was anticipating. The day of his first confrontation with Preston. This has become one of the points throughout his times in Gravity Falls that usually altered how the full timeline would go. After the first couple runs, Dipper dedicated a couple to finding out absolutely everything about the Northwest family. He has things in his head that would crumble their life to shreds. He literally had enough blackmail material, as well as knowledge where the evidence was, that he could own Northwest Manor. He could even own them as human furniture. And yes, he has done that before. He usually made Preston a footstool. Priscilla was normally forced to be a lamp, and he normally dropped his muddy shoes on Preston's head a couple times before selling them both off. Finding buyers for them was only so hard. Plenty of people willing to purchase two people for random reasons, depending on how they pissed him off during their first meeting. As far as her parents were aware, Pacifica was usually left as a seat pillow in a different room, where her clothes fit into the decor. What really happened was she was kept away from them, and left in her own room. Pacifica was never degraded by him in those timelines, because she hasn't truly brought his ire upon herself. Her parents have been given a special place in the bottom of his heart, where he stores all forms of cruel and evil tortures that he wishes to put them through. He still recalls a specific timeline, where he had run them out of town, married Pacifica, and they had twins. Preston had tried to kidnap his kids, and almost made it out with his daughter. Dipper was missing for a month, before he came walking back to Pacifica with their daughter. Pacifica had never figured why he disappeared. No one did. The cameras watching the children failed the night it happened. Preston was never seen, and no one could find him. What Dipper never mentioned was that he kept up with Preston. He then trapped him within his hotel room with magic, before torturing him with every form he had learned over the 158 lives he had lived. Cursing a man to eternal torment for eternity was not a quick and easy spell, especially when he wanted to make sure the man would continue to go through that torture every time he killed the bastard. In his timeline, Preston was too win-obsessed, mostly due to his own family issues, from his own childhood. He has tried his best to redeem the man. He earned the man's respect. He was the perfect winner for the man at one point, but the man was so deep into his own darkness, no amount of light could heal him. Depending on how badly Dipper beats them at some points throughout his life, Preston could deteriorate to the point of murdering his wife and trying to rape his daughter. Dipper has never allowed the second to happen. After a couple rounds of dealing with them, he has discovered exactly how Preston was ruined. The man was beaten by his own father when he lost at anything. His sister bullied him because she never lost at anything. His mother was one of those trophy wives, perfect looks and everything. But Preston never got over being treated like trash, even when his parents got hit by a truck one winter, while on their way to see his sister doing a recital. His older sister had done great at the recital, until her ex showed up asking for a second chance, and when she rejected him because she had already taken everything from the man, he set off the bomb he had on him. Needless to say, Preston was broken not long after. His parents were hit because they were losers. His sister failed to deal with her loose ends, making her a loser. He was a winner because he was alive. Dipper had read it all in the man's journal. Dipper's timeline was a little messed up. Preston has lost most reason to love anything but winning, because losers died. After his family lost, he started winning. His family were nothing but losers, that kept him from winning. Preston has gone down a very tragic road. Dipper could save the man. He had done it once before, when he proved that losers could still win. But that would cost him more than he was willing to pay. It cost him his soulmate. It only happened once. Faking it like he did to trick Wendy to win on occasion would not do. Pacifica had to die to redeem Preston. He has tried to redeem him with other options. There has never been the chance to save both. It was one or the other, so he always chose Pacifica. Dipper has killed Preston 348 times, tortured him 212 times, with an overlap of 108 times. Dipper at one point chose to just do several runs where he slowly ripped Preston apart. The man had even sold his daughter 457 times. Dipper making sure to be the buyer each and every time. Needless to say, after the many lifetimes Dipper has lived, Bill was not the one he hated the most. Bill had better chances of becoming the best man at his wedding than him ever liking Preston. Well, he would admit that he pressured the man into going that far. Dipper has done plenty. And yes, each time he purchased the girl, he has done something different, depending on what he was going for. Pacifica has been just his bed warmer. She has been his maid, his pet, and even simply his slave. He even once made her be Mabel's yes girl. That just wound up with Mabel labeling her as her sister. No matter what he said she was for the girl, Pacifica would always wind up being her sister. Dipper would always have a smile through those timelines. Mabel always knew how to read him. Even in the timelines he went evil. He actually couldn't explain it. Mabel was able to tell that he just didn't want to be mean to the girl, so he gave her to her. She also referred to her as the timelines he kept her in a familial term. She just kept making them feel like they just had a rather kinky relationship. Dipper sometimes wondered if his sister had used his chair after he did and was just trolling him. He has tested it, and apparently she didn't. Dipper had decided to use this day to see if his website had altered anything. He honestly would have come the last 2 times he got sent a ticket to Northwest Fest. But his parents didn't want him running off to some random rich guy's house. Then again, he didn't try too hard to convince them he wanted to go. He would have gone. But he would have been bored, and possibly end up flirting with Pacifica. He tried that one lifetime. Dipper had been intelligent beyond any mind on earth, and had made his family one of the richest in the world. Preston was ecstatic when his daughter had gained his attention. And then when Dipper tried to pull Pacifica into his family, Preston tried to get as much out of it as possible. Pacifica had gained everything that timeline, making her a winner. She was free to make her own choices, and all it took was being sold off. But when Preston found out he got nothing from her after she joined the Pines family as his betrothed, he was furious. Preston's greatest fear was losing. The man would go to any length to win and keep winning. But he could never beat Dipper at anything. Dipper would walk circles around the man. Even in his first lifetime, Preston held no real power. And when Dipper exposed the man in his first summer, when he and Mabel found Quentin Tremblay, Pacifica had screwed up and shown the man the papers, expecting him to do something about it. He had lost his temper on her, and Dipper had found this out after 20 years of their marriage. That first run-through, Dipper lost his temper for the first time, and they had an argument. She eventually convinced him to not travel across the country to murder her father. He still got revenge in a later lifetime, obviously. Dipper has a special place in his memory dedicated to his favorite ways he breaks the man. Dipper shook his head, realizing that the author just spent the last 4 pages, and the last 1,500 words, talking about Preston. Dipper shook his head from the fourth wall break, noticing how they had made their way to the stage, and was now looking at his most hated foe. Pacifica had just said her invite to anyone that wanted to show their pioneer spirit, and he slowly followed Mabel up. Pacifica wasn't completely happy to address the girl, who was still a boy. Dipper noticed there was extra makeup on Pacifica's cheek. Dipper had gotten to standing next to Mabel as Preston grew tired of hearing the chanting the girl started up. Pacifica hadn't said anything against the boy, just trying to rush him off the stage, ignoring the extra sewn-on patches and glitter that decorated Mabel's pioneer outfit. Preston gave a disappointed look towards Pacifica as he took it upon himself to put the girl in her place. "Little boy, you do realize how ridiculous you look with those patches sewn on all over your outfit. It is even covered in glitter, which won't be invented for another 80 or so years. This is a serious event for serious people. If you are only up here to goof off, then return home. We do not need people who can't even take a simple outfit seriously, here ruining our traditions." Mabel was now glad she didn't try to go all out as Dipper warned her about something like this. She had tried to goof off with Doritos, until Dipper warned her about people bullying her over them. She now knew who the boy meant. Dipper, however, pulled Mabel back, staring the man in the eye. "Well, Botox was invented nearly 120 years after Pioneer Day is set, so shouldn't your wife be sent home for not taking this day serious?" The fact that Dipper sounded a lot like any other rich popular bitch, like how Pacifica would sound if she was at the top of her game. Dipper could tell she had gotten hit for losing to Mabel the other night. Dipper was not going to let the man off easy. Preston glared at the girl before him. "And what would you know about being serious, little girl, you and your family, always doing your best to con these good people of their hard-earned cash?" Dipper laughed, and it was a rather haughty-sounding laugh. It made Preston a bit nervous. "If you want to talk about conning people, shall we reveal to them your dirty laundry? Of how Nathaniel Northwest was actually the equivalent to McGucket, A town idiot that was given credit of founding the town when the government tried to bury the truth? Or how about a different secret, one that is closer to home for you? How you were barely lucky enough to inherit your riches. Preston had stiffened when he heard what the girl said. Excuse me? Dipper laughed once more. What? You forgot all about the 3 that died to give you what you have. We both know that if your parents weren't hit by the truck that night, they would have just had another child to give their money to, because their son was a loser. Preston nearly snapped. Pacifica just stared as she watched her father losing his cool. Priscilla was also taking steps away from her husband, knowing the accident from that time was still a sore subject. Dipper would admit that it was practically a coin flip that decides how Preston takes the death of his family. One side, he would take their deaths, and become a better man. But the man before him had lost that coin flip. There are also timelines where he is kicked out, and the rough time he lives when young turns him into a better man. Dipper has looked through the multiverse on occasion and has seen the man be better. He has been a hippie. He has been a joyous man that dresses up and plays villains and heroes with his wife and daughter. He has seen this man become so happy with his family, and has seen him be far worse. He has seen him as a vampire, far worse monsters, and everything you can think of. He has seen so many ways this man could turn out, and has seen himself be worse. Dipper had honestly tried his best to help this man in the beginning, but the man would never accept help, because that would be admitting that he was losing. Preston took a deep breath, before snapping his fingers, and pointing at her. Dipper sighed when a man with a good amount of muscle placed a hand on her shoulder, gripping it rather tightly. Dipper didn't have to look to know that Mabel and Pacifica were looking scared, what with 2 large thugs about to drag the young girl off. Wendy was making his way up to the stage to teach these 2 how they should act towards a little girl. Wendy wasn't gonna make it in time to help the 2 lugheads though. As the man had grabbed her, his face hovering over her shoulder to threaten her, he was kicked in the nose by Dipper's right shoe. As the man stepped back, Dipper's toes hooked into his shirt collar, pulling her up with a slight jump with her left foot. She wound up planting her left heel, which everyone could now see were 2-inch heels that shined black, right into the man's shoulder, causing him to stiffen. Dipper kicked off into a sideways cartwheel, landing on her hands upon the second thug's shoulders as the first just fell over, unconscious. No one could utter a word, nothing to say over a girl taking the thug out in a single move. They were further silenced as the girl dropped down the thug's back, as she grabbed his shirt collar. The man choked. She kicked his thigh in a way to cramp it, so it was easier to use what weight she had to flip the guy. The guy wound up face down on the stage. Almost at the same time the first guy wound up falling flat on his back. Dipper stood up as she faced Preston once more, lifting her right foot, a needle stabbing out of the heel as she stabbed the second thug in the shoulder. The man falling unconscious soon after the hidden needle was removed. Well, they were easier than she thought they would be. Everyone there stared at the girl as she fixed her hair, dusted her shoulders, and checked her nails. That is what a winner looks like. But I guess I could sing you a little song, to remind you of your place. Suddenly, there was music. Nobody knew where the girl placed the karaoke machine, or how she knew to place it where she did for this. But apparently, she was gonna sing a song to put Preston in his place. Pacifica and Mabel both chose to step back towards the edge of the stage, where Priscilla looked to be cowering. Preston was the only one left center stage. As Dipper slowly began to sing a song, one she was fully aware would set the man off, she started to sing Outmatched by Rianeri. Dipper will admit that she is using future knowledge, due to this song not being made yet, but with how this backwater town is, she doesn't expect any of them to realize it as more than a song she made up. Preston stood there as he listened to the song, and could tell the girl had this whole thing planned when she tossed an apron at him. Somehow, this girl knew all this before meeting him, and she was leading him into a trap somehow. What was worse, was that she was winning. The song was hitting everything on the nose. His sister had forced him into servant outfits when they were young, and even a maid's outfit. The one that got him the most, however, was the lucky-to-be-born line, the very line his old family used to tell him. That line would always be a sore spot for him. As the girl was finishing the song, she had stepped one step too close, so he punched her. Everyone gasped. Preston had just punched a young girl in the face, leaving her with a broken nose. Preston was taking deep breaths as he watched the girl begin to get up, still singing, finishing up the song, and he actually gulped when he saw the blood covering her face, just now realizing what he had done, in public. Guess this means you lose? Dipper smirked as she pulled out a tissue, adjusting her nose, cleaning her face, and folding the tissue as she placed it into a plastic baggie back into her pocket. Preston looked on, as the girl just cleaned herself up, nose still purple and black from being punched, his family's signet ring being engraved into the bridge of her nose. These people can be paid for their silence. I have not lost anything. Dipper laughed at his words, some blood that was still in her mouth coloring her teeth. Not everyone can be bought, and I was talking about the contract you signed. Preston was confused, right along with everyone else there. What contract? Dipper pulled a piece of paper out of her pocket, and presented it to Preston to read. Preston took the paper and began to read as Dipper pulled out a bottle, filled with the antidote to her gender swap potion. The contract was worded as any contract between buyer and seller. He has signed plenty of these, so many he couldn't count them. He would normally skim through at best, they were literally all them same. This one was as well, until he got about halfway through, when it mentioned personal interaction. Apparently, he bought something from this boy at some point, and he had to sign this contract before he would build his request. The fine print is where he started to sweat, however, as the contract read, if any party of either side were to in one way or another bring physical harm upon the other, said harmed party would be given ownership of a property of their choice. It was worded in a way that one would think of the items the inventor made, and that if the inventor attacked you, you could get another invention from him for free. Reading it now, however, made it sound like the now boy, after he drank the vial, the boy next to his daughter had also drunk a potion and became a girl. It sounded like this boy could ask for whatever he wanted from him. Preston had recognized this contract. He had invited the inventor that made him sign it to each Northwest Fest in hopes to get the man to hit himself so he could trap the boy into working for him for free. And now here he is, falling into his own trap. Preston had signed 10 of these contracts in hopes of using all 10 when he sprung his trap. Dipper smirked at the man. Well, let's go look at what all I can claim of yours, shall we? Preston just glared at the boy. Preston Northwest was not a loser. Preston Northwest was a winner. Dipper watched calmly, as Preston reached into his shirt, and still watched as the man pulled out a small handgun. Dipper knew the man had a hidden arms permit. Preston always had it on him. But as Dipper predicted, the song that reminded Preston of his sister's years of torment, being called out on his parents, and even being stood up to by a young girl, that turned into a boy. Preston didn't advertise it, but he was homophobic. He was against every type of person that wasn't expected. He despised anyone who did anything to change what they were born as. Dipper was breaking Preston, emotionally and mentally, and now the man just lost it all. He didn't even have to go too far. Preston had taken each of his inventions, each challenge the man gave him, as a loss. Dipper just threw all his victories over the man in his face. Dipper was standing there and had laughed in the man's face several times as he sang a song that poked all the buttons to piss him off. Recently, his daughter has even lost. His daughter that he has raised to be a winner. Dipper has been silently planning this throughout the entire timeline, poking the man over the internet with a couple anonymous accounts, all laughing at him, pushing the man just enough to keep him angry throughout his life. As long as Pacifica wins, he wouldn't take it out on her, and she was indeed a winner. Her song was picked based on what Preston taught her, so that was more his loss as well. Dipper held his hand up as Preston pointed the gun at him. Preston pulled the trigger. Isnitfetak I fortsitna. The bullet that left the gun made it halfway to him, before flipping around and hitting Preston himself. Dipper scoffed at the man. Can't even win against a child, when you have the weapon? Preston felt the bullet hit him. He spent several seconds trying to figure out what happened, trying to think about how he could have lost. As the boy said, he had the gun, he pulled the trigger. Preston dropped to the ground, bleeding too much to make it to the hospital, especially with how terrible the services there was. Preston died with the last thought on his mind, being the curses. He mentally shouted at the damn Pines boy. Dipper stood calmly as Mabel rushed into his arms as she cried. Having just watched someone shoot at her brother, she had thought she was going to lose him. Pacifica and Priscilla were just lost, confused on what to do. Dipper watched as the teens watched from the crowd. The things going through their heads was rather easy to guess. They have been witness to small doses of his power, just watching as he used the knowledge to goof around with them and have fun. Now they saw something else. They have now seen him rip a man down to the point he pulled a gun on him. They couldn't even begin to think on what Dipper had to have done other than the song, calling out his wife on her Botox, and kicking his guards' asses. They didn't know how often Dipper mocked him online, how often he called the man out to get a new idea to build, that Preston would pay him for. Dipper has learned to hate Preston on a couple levels, and always enjoyed trying new ways to get the man killed. He can recall how many reenactment lives he went through. He took the role of Bowser, kidnapped Pacifica, and outfitted Wendy with what she needed to be Mario. He got to set Preston on fire or drop the guy in lava during those. He has even gone Ganondorf and treated Pacifica as Zelda. The hardest about those timelines was placing the Master Sword where only Wendy could retrieve it. He almost laughed himself to defeat when Robbie confronted him once. Dipper stared over at Priscilla and Pacifica. I do believe we have a couple things we need to talk about. Wendy and the other teens just stepped back, deciding to take the antidotes, seeing as the fun was over.